for joining us here today. On behalf of Dean Boulding and the Executive Fellows, welcome to the first Distinguished Speaker Series event of the 2017-2018 school year. Please take the time now to silence your phones. To start us off this year, we have a DSS first, 2 guest speakers, and it is my privilege to introduce them both. Jud Linville is the CEO of Citi, the industry's largest credit card issuer. He serves on Citigroup's operating committee and Global Consumer Banking Council. Mr. Linville has been involved with Fuqua since 2006 as a member of Fuqua's Board of Visitors and is a return guest of the Distinguished Speaker Series. After experiencing the event for himself, Mr. Linville has graciously enlisted one of his colleagues and strategic business partners, Ajay Banga, to join this year's series. And we're incredibly fortunate to have them both today. Mr. Banga is the president and CEO of Mastercard and sits on the company's board of directors. He's a founding trustee of the U.S. India Strategic Partnership Forum, a member of the U.S. President's Advisory Committee for Trade Policy, and on the board of governors of the American Red Cross, just to name a few. Please welcome me in joining Jud back to Fuqua and AJ for the first time.
Welcome to the both of you. Jud, welcome back, and thank you so much for roping Ajay into this and finding someone whose personal brand and corporate brand is so consistent with the Fuqua brand. So it's great to have you be a part of our community, Ajay. So I'm gonna kick things off with a question, which is in your particular industry, you have all kinds of players who've come onto the scene. And on any given day, in any given context, the person that you're talking to could be your customer, your provider, your partner, your competitor. And the question is, today you come here as friends and partners, but the question is, how do you keep balance in those relationships when things can be changing so rapidly from moment to moment?
Ajay, you want to start? Go ahead.
Age before beauty.
And trust me, we'll finish each other's sentences by the end. I am a huge believer that you can't today always distinguish whether somebody's a competitor, a customer, or a collaborator. If we look at so many of the developments, whether it's small fintech or whether it might be what Apple does with payments, as simply a threat, there's so much we're missing out on. I can tell you that we took our teams out to Silicon Valley several years ago, and all the startups we would spend time with, because what we saw was maniacal focus, incredible engineering talent, design-led thinking that said, here's how you create customer journeys that are really elegant and remove friction. In fact, in some cases, makes payment disappear, think Uber. And rather than looking at that as a threat, said, how do we embrace it? I'm sure we'll talk a bit about how technology stacks have changed at big financial institutions. What used to be, and Ajay spent 15 years at Citibank, and he knows this well, and built a great consumer business, that tech builds used to be 2 or 3 a year, 2 or 3 releases, built in waterfall with months of regression testing. Now, if you saw how engineering talent, the mashup between product folks, marketing folks, decision science folks, and engineers, working on agile teams. We talk about it as 2 pizza box size teams, so they can't be bigger than what 2 pizzas would serve when everybody's working late into the night. And how things get built on a rapid iterative prototype basis, where we're releasing sometimes every week. In May, our entire release stack was built in agile. To me, taking the best of what those folks do and figure out how you do it to reverse engineer. By the way, head of technology came from Amazon, brought a bunch of Amazon engineers. Now, a bunch of folks that are in fintech startups that sometimes having trouble scaling are now looking and saying, boy, it looks pretty interesting to be over at a big bank. The other part of it is we're constantly having discussions about, do you build, do you buy, or do you borrow? And so many of the fintechs that have trouble finding ways to scale, I also look and say, how do we repurpose some of the capabilities you've got? And I'm not too proud to white label some different things. So to me, it's being inside the tent as opposed to trying to constantly create protective moats around yourself. That's not a winning strategy.
I think Jud says it very well. The protective moat logic, if you watch Lord of the Rings and you see your castle and you think of your asset and you've got a moat around it and you find people coming at you, you can throw rocks at them, you can pour boiling oil on them, you can shoot arrows at them, but there are more of them than you. They will get over your wall. And so the trick is, if you think that you're going to protect your castle by standing still and protecting it, you will lose. The trick is to move your castle around in such a way that the bugger can't find the castle. That's the way to do it. And the only way to do that is to engage with that environment in a constructive way, which is what Jud just described a couple of examples of. In our industry, my view is that electronic payments are just 15% of retail payments right now globally. And in the case of P2P money and business to consumer money and global dispensation of government to consumer money, it's an even smaller proportion. So there's a big business out there to be gained by killing cash as compared to fighting with each other on the margins of that 15% that today is electronic. So defining your frame and realizing that you can't protect your moat just by standing still, and that won't keep you safe, it leads you to realizing that you have to move smoothly from friendship and partnership to a competitor and incorporate them in your thinking. But you also had one other point which you used in your question, which is relationship. And Jud and I will say this every day long to you. I believe that in our current jobs, if you don't know how to manage relationships, and if you don't know how to build them, nurture them, sustain them, invest in them, and care about them because you care about them from deep inside, you cannot win in business. You just cannot. The world is too intertwined, and business is no longer built in a silo. There's no such thing. Even Apple today is a much more partnership-driven company, and it's not that easy to find a company of that example, but most of these companies rely on the fact that they've got to build relationships with people. So I'm a believer that relationships are key, and if you can't build them, you're going to have difficulty being a real leader.
So, Jud, in previous conversations with me, you've kind of modestly talked about your business as one where you're just trying to get a stream of nickels and roll up those nickels. But in more recent conversations, it's been, we're in the technology business. And so can the two of you tell us, how do you make the transformation from a business which has just kind of done things the same old way and rolled up those nickels to living in this high-tech world?
So I think, Bill, we've had the conversation where I would describe the fact that we are a technology company that just happens to have a banking license. And I don't know that that's a new phenomenon. I think it's been the case for a long time. Walter Wriston, a CEO, several CEOs ago at Citi, used to refer to the most powerful asset we've got is information. And if you think about the business I run, the payment business I run, we've been a big data business from day one. We've been a digital company from the time a mag stripe was put on a piece of plastic at IBM in 1958. We've been displacing paper, currency, and coins since then. Whether we treated it as a technology company, whether we treated it as a digital and mobile company, I think that the threats from fintechs was actually one of the great gifts of challenging the way we were building technology, challenging the way we thought about designing a customer experience and that journey, and frankly challenged a lot about how we organize work, how we organize teams. We were talking about today decision scientists that are working on these things. They're not in the cubicle off themselves running programming, working off Hadoop. They are actually sitting with the teams as we're designing the customer journeys. It also means the type of talent that we think about acquiring. And so that banks, I think, used to build a lot bottoms up. Now we're, in fact, hiring in a bunch of different places where we'll create labs or pods, or we'll co-create together with partners. So to me, it's not as if it's a massive change in how we think about it. We've always been deep with technology. How we deploy technology, how we think about engineering, how we think about designing jobs has changed pretty dramatically.
The only thing I'd add to that is we don't actually issue a card. He does. We are the railroad, kind of the tracks on which rails cars can run. So think about us as providing standards so that You don't have to have a different rail car from here to Philadelphia and then one from there to New York because the rails didn't match. That would be a very expensive and very frictionful way of leading your life. So we create these rails that look the same globally. And then you can choose as an institution like Citibank to run a car on those rails that has air conditioning, doesn't have it, has beer being served, doesn't serve it, has food, doesn't have it, is a first-class car or a second-class car, and you charge for the values that are implied in those differences. And so you create product differentiation, not on the rails, but on the rail car that you run. That's how we look at our product and our partnership. And so to me, I am actually nothing other than a technology infrastructure company, because I don't issue a card. He does, I don't. I have no consumer relationships. I have a B2B business, and through him, a B2B2C business, where I should bring to him knowledge and comprehension of his consumer to help him win, because it's his consumer, and if he wins, I win. And that's the partnership that we've built in this industry that works well. So we're a tech firm and a data firm. And honestly, I think you described it really well. I think banking of that type essentially is a data and technology firm. Whether all of us made the changes adequately early in the innovation cycle of the last 15 or 20 years, or we've got dragged there over the last 5 or 10 years, that's a different question. Because firms like IBM, Kodak was a tech firm, but where's Kodak today? It's gone. And so I think that's a different issue that we can get into as to why do we think Kodak went that way and we believe we're not going that way, at least we hope we aren't. But
Ajay, I would add that if you were listening to the conversations that the two of us have, it's one part around standards and the principles we put in place, because running a network has to have standards. Payments cannot have anonymity. We have to have access to data. That's how it's driven. And frankly, the point of differentiation is then on the issuing side, where I'm bringing new customers in, I'm building a deeper engagement, I'm capturing more wallet share. And I need to do that on a platform that has standards, because I joke with my team all the time. Creativity without standards is just madness. You got to have good disciplines in place that then allows you to iterative prototype and innovate and try new things that are going to break through for customers. So when in fact networks don't have standards, that's the riskier proposition. That's why even discussions we had about blockchain or Bitcoin and the others, that it's very different than the model that we operate in today.
So I think it's not just about being a tech firm or not, it's about the culture of the firm. Are you really a tech firm in today's context? Or are you a tech firm in a 20-year-ago context? And that's the change that we've all made into migrating into what we think is a successful space for technology today. That, the cultural context of that is enormous, because it's a different way of empowering people, it's a different way of recognizing risk, it's a different way of rewarding risk-taking, it's a different way of recognizing failure, it's a different way of accepting failure. There's a whole lot there that guys like he and I are building over the last decade, I'd say.
Yeah. So it sounds like either the limiting factors or the ability to enable these new achievements and the growth that you both have experienced is more of a people question than a technology question. Is it people and culture that?
Look, I think only a bad workman blames his tools, and similarly, anybody who thinks it's about technology and not about people, you're fooling yourself. Your life as a leader starts with people, goes with people, and ends with people. Technology, data, marketing, all the functions we study and we work with, they're enablers for those people. If you don't have the right people, if you don't empower them the right way, if you don't give them a purpose, if you don't give them a way to win, if you don't give them a methodology to measure how they know when they're winning, if you don't celebrate with them, if you don't cry with them, you're a lousy leader. You can have the best technology in the world, you're a lousy leader. And that's the issue, fundamentally.
So I'd say, Bill, it comes down to people, process, and platforms. Ajay described it beautifully as it relates to people. I believe in the service profit chain that says if leaders know that they work on behalf of their teams, and those teams know they work on behalf of customers, and that whether it's the celebration, whether it's the crying together, but you create that connectivity and that sense of purpose, that then customers come along and then shareholders come along. To me, the business I'm in, the fun thing is that it's a mashup of no matter what your degree is. So if you're a quant jock, mine is a business that is massively analytically driven and derived. If you're a marketer, this is where all the marketing dollars go, whether it's hopefully anybody that was watching The Voice or National Football last night, Monday Night Football, saw our first new brand campaign. So stay tuned, a lot more that's coming on that. So if you're a marketer, my God, this is a great place to be. If you're more of a kind of portfolio manager, if you think about the cards business, each product line is a different asset class, and you're constantly thinking about how you rebalance your asset class. If you're an engineer, this is a massive transaction processing business that has huge opportunity to constantly re-engineer to take friction out and eliminate the waste that happens. I mean, I could go on and on and on. So to me, it's that mashup of skills. The process is also what's changed, to your question. So the process of how we went to market, how we understood customer needs, how we designed customer journeys, how we actually built code it wasn't that long ago. Requirements were written, business requirements documents, then thrown over the wall to a technology organization, and the teams would wait for 3 months and say, I hope that weekend when we launch, it doesn't crash the system. Today, code's going out every single week. And then lastly, the platforms. Now it's about, Ajay and I will talk about APIs and talk about web-based services. It's not just about agile development, it's actually the tool sets we've got with data, being able to operate on these big data lakes in Hadoop. So in my mind, it's all three. It's the platforms, it's process, and people.
So I think platform is a really good topic. I believe that the genius of people like Steve Jobs was built around owning a platform. And so if you spend your time in creativity building a platform with technology that is superior, that allows you to then innovate on that platform. Right. So if you look at the iTunes store, or if you look at what APIs are doing right now, what they're doing is allowing other people to use your platform to create innovative ideas that are more in number than you could ever do yourself. And so any company that believes that once I have the platform, all future use cases built on that platform will also be built by me internally, that company will lose. So it's the platform is only the way to enable others to link in. That's what new technology is doing. That's what all of us are building. So, we've got data, and we do 50 billion transactions a year. We have, 2.5 billion people use our cards, or phone or fingerprint. I really don't care how you connect. There's 200 countries we work in. There's, 40, 50 million merchants who accept these payments. That's a platform. And that's the global platform that I'm talking about. And then how you build on it and how you allow people to innovate with it, that openness and that willingness to work with them is what makes you a winner. Otherwise, you're going to box yourself into the limits of your own imagination.
Yeah, and ultimately it becomes a model that is faster, better, cheaper. Just a simple example.
Exactly.
With thank you points, the reward currency at Citi within the cards business. We worked with Amazon to build, when shopping at Amazon, at checkout, a pay with points in 3 clicks. It's beautiful. It's incredibly simple. When we first did it, when we first built it, it took us 13 months and a kind of whole big host-to-host. By the time we had built APIs and we were launching in Asia or in Mexico, it was less than 30 days. So the ability to then build out core code you can reuse. Digital wallets. We have more digital wallets than any bank or any issuer around the globe because we built one platform that then can be repurposed for Apple Pay or Android Pay or MasterPass all the way through. So that's the change.
So following up on the idea of building a great platform and the reference to Steve Jobs, does Apple Pay keep you awake at night? Do you view this as just something that makes your businesses better? So how do you feel about that kind of innovation?
The only thing that keeps me awake at night is that my wife is snoring. Other than that, I'm relatively a good sleeper. So I don't know. I sleep pretty well.
I can't wait
to get shot for that.
I can't wait to have dinner with her. And if my wife snored at night, I probably wouldn't say anything.
You may ask for some editing rights later.
Oh, that's good. Oh, that's going to be rich at dinner. I can't wait. So I think we both probably have comments on anything that changes the way buyers and suppliers come together and we take out friction and it's done better is a good thing. The next piece of it is then how do we think about working within those rails and that network and what's that business model? And anybody who tells you they know how digital wallets, who's going to be the winner and who's not, is absolutely wrong. So whether it's Google and Android, whether it's Samsung, it's got their own model, whether it's Apple, whether it's Citi or other issuers that issue on Ajay's MasterPass or Visa checkout, to me, my view is that I want to build the platform. I want to be able to interoperate. I want to take the best of the different capabilities that each provides. I want to see what else Apple can provide into the experience, because to me, it's not the phone tap and pay. The fact is in Australia, cards can tap and pay. 80% of the transactions already happen. A swipe is not that kind. But in the checkout process, when I'm shopping online, and not just on a browser, but with a phone, and instead of having to type in 144 characters or register my card on a merchant site, which in today's world is not a good thing, I want to have a token that goes through that doesn't expose my primary account number. I want it, to be able to access that simply. And merchants that have 25% of e-commerce shopping excursions end up in an abandoned shopping cart. If I can improve that with easy checkout, 200 basis points, 300 basis points, the value to merchants is massive. So to me, right now, I want to play on all of these and then figure out how we unlock the next set of breakthroughs.
So speaking of the transaction itself, how do you feel about the chip technology, which now you have to wait and wait and wait till it beeps at you and says you're okay? So to have something that had been around in other parts of the world for many years, then come here, does that feel like a technology advance or a step back?
Oh, I think it's a technology advance. I think, let me frame this for you differently. If I were answering the question, what kept me up at night with seriousness, I would tell you that safety and security keeps me up at night. And the reason for that is that the level of fraud managed, just in the card business, America had become the favorite destination for fraud because America was the market with MaxStripe. And MaxStripe allows itself to be used in many different ways to enable fraud, both physical and online. Chip technology takes away a large part of that in the physical world. It doesn't take it away in the online world. That's why the token that he was referring to is a way that your card number never goes to a merchant. An alternative 16-digit number that's randomly generated using a cryptogram that we can unlock is what goes. There are many things being done on safety, but I would tell you the safety topic is a much bigger one. I'm not just talking about Equifax, which is a recent topic. You need to think through the fact that the Internet of Things is going to create 25 to 50 billion connected devices in the next few years. So all you people in this room, you're all tech savvy. Right now, your phone is listening to you. You don't think it is, but it is. The question then is, what does it do with what it's listening to? If somebody else were able to break in and listen to that conversation, that would be a bad thing. So the reason why when you enter a safe, secure place, your phone is left outside is not because they think you look at your email while you're talking to the President of the United States. It's because they know you can break into that conversation while you're sitting there. So you need to understand that connectivity, where the average consumer values convenience over safety, thinking that the company is going to provide the safety, that's something you need to think about in the day of an interconnected device, which may or may not be built for that. So when you agree to look at your weather app and it says, I need to access your contacts, and you say allow, you need to help me understand why a weather app that tells you it's 83 degrees in Durham needs to bloody well access your contacts. But it does, and you allow it. And when you keep your GPS location finder on 24 hours a day, your movement pattern is being captured. And it's being used in some way to generate some form of insight and data. So my point here is, you should think carefully about safety and security, because not everybody out there is using your data for purposes that's useful to you. And that interaction is not yet clear to the community at large. And I believe that to be the one thing that makes me worry. Therefore, a chip card, back to that simple question, a chip card to me, which actually, by the way, does not take, the difference is in a mag stripe, you pull the stripe and you pull the card back. In a chip, you've got to leave it in there till it's done. The difference is really in the transaction processing time is de minimis. It's the nature of the consumer experience that's different. And the world over, that's been the case, that people actually begin to rely on the chip card as being way safer. But I think it's a bigger topic than a chip card. It's about safety and security in a digitally connected world where your refrigerator will talk to your toaster to order bananas, which, by the way, is what people are telling you will happen. Now, you may not want that to happen, but the stuff will do it for you. And there's a reason why people keep a duct tape on their computer camera. There's a reason why. And you should just think through at what point does technology go beyond being a facilitator to being an invasion of your space. I really think it's important. I think you got to vote with your thinking and your feet and your hands as compared to just accepting convenience over the use of your information for purposes other than what's useful to you.
And Bill, I would say that depending on how you look at this, for Ajay and I both, and I'd say just about any other leader around the globe, cybersecurity and the reputational risk associated is probably one of the biggest concerns they've got. In payments, it's easy to eliminate fraud. You can just stop all the transactions. How you build layers of authentication in that are indeed faster, better, cheaper, and better customer experience, to me, this was just a stopgap for counterfeit fraud, counterfeit cards. To me, you already see the fraud moving to card not present e-commerce. And to, I think, both of us, it's how do we quickly move toward tokenization? Because I'd argue that there's a world in the future where between the rails and the unique identifier that your bank account has, that token and that token vault, we could actually be the fair market broker that ensures that all those things are turned off unless you want them turned on. Because the Internet of Things is going to make all of that accessible, and most of those transactions will have some kind of economic exchange. That's a further out there, not next year kind of idea, but I truly believe that if you think about the core essence of banking should be about trust. We spend a lot of time talking about, in very simple ways, how do you establish that, and in the future, what might that look like?
You know, the most popular passwords in the world are password and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
And welcome.
And yeah, and you, and by the way, 70% of Americans.
You just taught everyone here how to hack, by the way.
And 70% of Americans who've opened a bank account from 10 years ago online have never changed their password, ever, in those 10 years. Now, if we put the job on a consumer to change a password every 30 days for the 29 different things they have passwords, and on a different day of the month for each of the 29, that permutation and combinations of passwords that you have to remember render you into saying, my password will be welcome 1, welcome 2, or if you really want to be clever, it'll be welcome 1 hash, or it'll be capital W, welcome hash 1, or muck like that. All of which.
And you'll stop remembering.
Correct. All of which a 5-year-old or 10-year-old can hack into relatively simply. That's the kind of challenge we've got. Passwords are yesterday, but the technology is built on passwords. Convenience is more important than security. That's not a good idea. And the system's going into connectivity. And just to make it a little more interesting, since we're on interesting topics, there's 2 billion people in the world who don't have an account. If everything is going to be connected to everything else, you got to pay for it. For that, you have an account. If you don't have an account, 2 billion people are going to be left out of the system. If you're talking about a social crisis that will come our way, if today's inequality is a topic of interest to you, you should be worrying about 10 years from now in a far more sort of, let's say, multiplied fashion than today. So I just believe that this whole topic of security and digital connectivity and this is a much bigger topic than just a topic of safety. It's a topic of the way we operate as a society. And this is a tech firm guy talking. So I understand what I'm doing with this. And I served on the Presidential Commission on Cybersecurity. Trust me, you don't want to know what I know. You just don't. So it's really not, it's worth thinking your way through this in a good way. And I'm saying it in a college because young people determine where technology goes. You vote with your feet and your hands. Use them.
So given that people are so oblivious to these issues and the Internet of Things just makes you vulnerable in so many different ways, and the reality of human behavior that you don't want to have to pay attention to these things, is there a business opportunity here in your space?
Yeah, to me, if you think about, it's the equivalent of folks that used to have a lockbox. I'm sure almost nobody in the room knows what a lockbox is, but when people used to go into a bank and they would have their deposit account book that would keep their record, and if they had valuable documents or other things, jewelry, they'd keep it at a bank in a safe deposit box. Think about this as the equivalent of a digital lockbox. Think if you had that digital lockbox that in fact was tokenized so that it only knew you and was protected within that digital vault. So that then whenever you needed to get those valuables out, like your payment credentials, wherever you need to use them would generate a random 16-digit code that both Ajay and I, the network, the merchant acquiring bank, and the issuer would know that it's you. Imagine the reverse auction. If we said, also I can get better value for you because I know that you really love travel or you really love X. And in fact could say, I have access to these folks, what kind of deals could you give? There's so many ways that can be, and so then you're the fair market broker for those tokens. So I think this can go in a bunch of different ways. But it starts first and foremost with security of those credentials.
So I think the internet was the single most enabling technology in many generations. It is the ultimate democratization of capability and opportunity. So don't get me wrong about it. I think it's very powerful, but it wasn't designed for security. It was actually designed for an open exchange of everything. Now, because everything is going onto it, people who have a bad intention visualize that absence of design for security as an opportunity to break into, which could take away the power of that technology from all of us as people. So, if you go back in time and history, the printing press is what allowed knowledge to move from religious leaders to books. That allowed you to be able to read a book and not have to go to a religious leader to seek wisdom. And then from there it ended up in something called the Encyclopedia Britannica, which none of you will know, but we three do know. And if you ever were able to buy one of those, it was expensive. You got it as a gift at graduation. That's now called Google. And you basically Google for anything. It's all part of that fabulous technology that will allow older people to get medicine at the right time, healthcare to be administered. So don't get me wrong. I think technology is exciting and a huge opportunity, but it needs to be carefully handled so we can get to its real potential as compared to its destructive capability. And that's the conversation. Therefore, there's a business opportunity, there's a social opportunity, and there's a people opportunity in technology, so long as we have an adult conversation about how to use it the right way.
If you think about, Bill, the conversation we had about Bitcoin and blockchain, there's a very clear analogy. Bitcoin, in many respects, is less like a currency and more like a commodities future exchange. It's a highly speculative. There's not a bank that sits behind it. And by the way, there's anonymity. And with anonymity, when you're moving things of value, that's a dangerous proposition. The underlying distributed ledger and blockchain is actually fascinating technology that if deployed in the right way, so we have labs in Tel Aviv and in Dublin and Singapore, we're constantly doing test and learn kinds of experiments. Think about thank you points, the currency on the card product. That's a currency we generate. We run a marketplace, an exchange, where people are using Amazon to check out or anywhere else. Imagine that that's built on a distributed ledger with permissions, where it was clear That's a great use of a technology where thinking about it as a currency, to me, is not a effective use of distributed ledger.
So most technologies still require the pipes, they still require the financial institutions. Bitcoin is an attempt to bypass some of those, both of those features. Jamie Dimon recently called it a fraud and compared it to Dutch tulips. I think people might not understand what that means, but
It was a big fraud.
yeah. So is that something, I mean, you said it's more like commodities, but is a cryptocurrency, do you worry about being bypassed, or do you think that that's just not feasible given issues around the need for transparency in financial transactions?
I'll take a quick shot at it, and I know Ajay has thoughts on it as well. To me, if many of the use cases for that currency are actually bad actors who want to operate in an anonymous fashion. It is also something without permissions that makes it difficult to adjudicate. So if you have a dispute, such a large piece of what we build is how you handle a dispute, and how we talk about all the time, how we've got the consumers back if something goes wrong. So I think that there's massive challenges with that notion that somehow that could displace. Again, the underlying technology, I think, is fascinating when you think about value exchange, particularly when it's transparent and evident with permissions.
Look, I've been quoted publicly for a while saying that my belief is that Bitcoin is bunk, and I still believe that. But the blockchain, to me, if, again, like I was talking about earlier, guide rails that allow us to use it well, the blockchain to me could be really interesting. And we can talk about blockchain in a minute. But Bitcoin for itself, when you have a demand-supply system for currency that's managed by a finite number of coins that can be issued, and you think somehow the world's commerce can be managed through that, if I was a merchant right now and I sold this young gentleman that green bottle for 2 Bitcoins, because it's the equivalent of $5 as of this second, and then 5 minutes later, those 2 Bitcoins worth $1, and then 25 minutes later, they're worth $2,800. That's bullshit. and I
From a technical point of view, yes.
Completely. And therefore, it's bunk. And to me, that's not logical. That's just speculation. There's a role for speculation. I have no problem with people treating it like a commodities future exchange. Knock yourself out. If you're a sophisticated investor and you know how to make money out of it, go right ahead. So but don't assume.
That is not investment advice from Ajay, by the way.
Just do whatever you want. It's up to you. Exactly. But to believe that that is a logical medium of exchange is what I'm struggling with. Because that's what a currency is designed to do, is to provide exchange of value between one and the other. You can argue that governments have treated currencies as a permanent honeypot and have drawn into it for value whenever they wanted. And so in actual fact, your currency, even a government-owned currency, has devalued or appreciated over time, depending on how you draw in and out of it. Because I'm a student of economics, I kind of get that. But that's not the same. That there's a social contract behind that dollar that won't make the bottle go up and down by that value in the course of 10 minutes. So that's the first problem. The second problem is that if Bitcoin is used for legitimate purposes, which is buying a bottle and doing other good things, I'm good with that. But if it's used by people who anonymously seize your computer and then tell you to pay in Bitcoin and call a call center, which was set up. There were call centers set up for that case, for people to pay in Bitcoins, for releasing your own files back to you. That's not a legitimate way of conducting business. And the reason they want to get paid in Bitcoin is because it is anonymous. You know, I say this story about cash all the time. If you kind of buy a drug on the streets, you don't exactly pay with a Citibank credit card. At least not when I was younger. I don't know about you guys. And if if
I'm
you,
pretty sure they're not accepted either. We're pretty good at making sure of that.
and if you,
Not going to be a part of your ad campaign.
yeah, well, if you look at if you look at cross-border illegal activity anywhere, guns in a country, drugs elsewhere, terrorism, you have to convince me that that's done in legitimate transaction ways. It's not. And therefore, as a society, to encourage something to be built because we think it's cool, when our entire fabric of society could be pulled aside, that's a conversation again that young people need to have, and just as we need to. So that's the Bitcoin angle.
I think it's also much like the conversation we had earlier, I think it's a fascinating place for that intersection of commerce or private sector and public sector and government. I think that nobody in the industry would look and say, boy, the next thing we hope for is legislation or regulation on some technology solution. Because that's not how we're likely to get the best effective means, but how we as leaders engage the government on permissions that we should be sharing this information across the industry. There should not be restrictions on this. We should be thinking about how do you create negative files to actually track those. We should be thinking about how we're engaging the federal government agencies together. So to me, there's so many examples of where, rather than us trying to do it individually, or rather than the private sector just trying to solve it, this is a perfect example of where you want to activate for those federal agencies to work with us.
Yeah. So that's a great transition to talk about the intersection between business and society more generally. It's clearly been the case that there's been a lot of activity that shows the collision between business and politics lately. Ajay, you were at a conference yesterday that asked the question, as I understand it, is capitalism broken? Or is it possible to rework that model in some way? So can you comment on these questions of, does business have to change in some way to be more relevant in the society we live in?
Well, I think that first of all, I believe that you cannot run a business in the world without being connected to the quality of life of society around you. And that's why I'm having this discussion, even the use of technology. I just believe that if we don't have this conversation, I haven't fulfilled my responsibility to having an adult conversation about the pluses and minuses of things. So similarly, business that lives on a fractured society cannot be successful. It's in my interest to have a stable, growing middle class, a group of people who can look forward and can have more money to spend, because when they spend more, I make more money. That's how it works. And every business lives on that. So in your own self-interest is the idea of working well with your community. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I believe the quality of public discourse has deteriorated in a very rapid way in many countries around the world. And if public discourse is deteriorating in the political system, that doesn't mean that we as society don't want a good discourse. We do. But where will it come from unless all of us get involved? So this is not just business, it's business and civil society that needs to contribute to a discourse that is open, honest, and transparent. And that, to me, is the responsibility of people like us. So to me, the world's got a few interesting problems right now. Governance is one of them, and discourse is there. But there's drinking water, where China and India and Africa have 52% of the world's population with about 10% of the world's drinking water. You have to see that as an emerging social crisis that is just around the corner. We've got issues with inclusive growth. And so is capitalism broken because the rich make more money and the poorer are being left behind? I would ask you to think through cycles of economic recession. Again, I'm a student of economics, so I'm a bit of a dope on these things. But if you were to sit and draw a graph of interest rates and the return on capital versus the return to labor over the last 50 years, you'll find every time there's a recession, the return on capital goes up and the return to labor goes down. Why is that? It's because you lay off people and interest rates come down. So therefore, you make more money on your capital and you pay people differently. And because there's more laid off people, Wage competition brings it down. When the cycle comes back out, in theory, wages should begin to rise. The return to capital should come down as interest rates go up. We're going through that cycle right now. It's not a good place to be. It's not that capitalism is broken. It is the form of the cycle of capitalism and the form and manner in which it is being allowed to be implemented that needs a good discourse. So as a company, it's my responsibility to find ways. Now, I want to make sure you understand one thing. I run a company for shareholders. He does. Shareholders are demanding, but shareholders are not only demanding for return this quarter. They're demanding for you to build a franchise that's worth something. Our PE ratio is 35. That means people are paying 35 times our earnings per share for our stock price. That means they think we're going to be around for 35 years or 25 out of those 35 years, delivering good returns. You can't operate on a monthly basis when your stockholder is telling you, I'm viewing you out there for 25 years. So the question is, what part of your business model can you adapt to make a relevant difference for people out 25, 30 years? That is the essence of leadership today.
So
that's what we're doing.
And I would say, Bill, that so Citi's been around for over 200 years. And you don't do that without adapting to change and embracing change, embracing not just employees and customers, but communities. And in effect, if you think about it, we talk a lot about being a purpose-driven brand over the past couple of years that is the trusted partner that enables progress for consumers, for small businesses, for major corporations, and for governments around the globe, whether it's small steps or giant leaps. And so I think the clearest evidence is that how brands get built, it's the promises you make, the experiences you deliver, and word of mouth. And today, word of mouth is huge. And if you are not embracing the entire economy, if you're not embracing the dialogue, brands can go off the rails incredibly quickly. To me, the discussions are not about just the predictability and consistency of a brand. And by the way, if the moat that we were talking about, if there is one competitive moat you have, if you have a strong brand, that provides you a huge competitive moat and a premium on your valuation. To me, it's not just the predictability and consistency, it's when, in fact, in times of need. And I think you see the best brands and the best companies step forward, whether it's a underserved, as Ajay was talking about, whether it's an earthquake in Mexico, whether it's hurricanes in Houston or South Florida. And I can tell you, investors, they care about it. A week ago Friday, I was supposed to meet with some investors, very important investors, have a pretty big stake in Citi. And the night before, I decided with the fellow who runs the Global Consumer Bank that we should get down to South Florida, check on the employees, the teams that were in the branches. We had lit up with generators, more branches than anybody in that South Florida area. And so coming down with cell phone chargers and just to be there to me, seeing our customers interact with the folks in that branch, that they knew their stories and their lives, those are the kind of things that, to me, I think affect the quality of the public perception, the private-public interaction, and frankly, I think that's what drives capitalism at its core, when firms know how to do the right thing.
There's nothing to be ashamed of for capitalism. This country is built on capitalism. It's a very successful country. I migrated here when I was 40 years old. I'm glad I did it. I love being here. I am a patriot to every inch of my being, but that doesn't mean it can't work even better. That's the conversation, as compared to questioning capitalism per se.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
Okay, I'm going to ask one last question before turning it over to the audience. And given you made the comment about coming to this country, we've seen people from the business community weigh into the political discourse around a number of issues like immigration, climate change, events in Charlottesville, to name just a few. And so I just wanted the two of you to kind of walk us through how you make decisions about when you weigh into these conversations and when you stay on the sidelines.
Look, I have a very simple perspective on this. The first is that everybody is entitled to a point of view, so long as that point of view is discussed in a civil way. And therefore, my whole approach has been that I will tell you my point of view, but you as an employee of my company, you're more than welcome to have a different point of view. And we can have a discourse on it. And if my point of view is, if I can help more people succeed, I will. And if that means I have to provide help, protection, and ways of improving people's lives, I will. And if you don't agree with me, that's okay. And the transparency of discourse is, I think, what we need. So I've put out, when the first immigration ban was issued by the current administration, I put out an email that actually got onto the public space, and portions of it got published in Time magazine, which is not what you want to see because it is meant to be an internal email. But these days, internal and external are very connected together.
Permeable.
And what I kind of said was that, what pains one of us pains all of us. And in the family of the company you're in, at the end of the day, I really don't care about where you came from or what you look like. I do care about what you do and how you do it. And that matters to me a great deal. Your decency matters to me a great deal. That doesn't mean that I don't want strong borders. It doesn't mean that I don't want the right kind of security for the country. I should not be, as a citizen, be given the option of saying it's either security or a welcoming country. I'm sorry, that's not American values. I just don't agree. And therefore, to tell me that somehow, suddenly, the choice has become one where it's either security or welcoming, that's a choice I'm unwilling to be presented with as a citizen. I'm just not willing to.
Ajay, we often talk about good companies are good at figuring out how to have world-class products or lower cost. I could come through countless dichotomies. Great companies, it's not an either or, it's an and. And I think the same applies here. If you are at a firm, if you find whether small, big, or global, a place where you understand their values because it's so evident in the way people behave, we talk about constructive confrontation at work. That it's not a bad thing to confront. It's got to be a constructive confrontation. Decency was the word that Ajay used, which I think appropriately applies. And if you think about the diversity of the businesses we run, the diversity of the talent that we attract, the different kinds of skills that I talked about, but around the globe, threatening the free movement of talent in our organization is a huge competitive threat, down to making decisions about bathrooms in North Carolina, that we have a diverse group of people that we want to make sure that we can give them every equal opportunity to succeed, because then it's about how they think, how they work, how they build relationships, which is where we just started. Reinforcing those elements of the culture and the value system we got is the most important thing.
If you were sitting in a town hall in Mastercard, you would hear us saying that IQ is really important, EQ is really important. What really matters to me is DQ. And I don't mean Dairy Queen, although that's cool too. But what I really mean is decency quotient. And if you can bring your decency quotient to work every day, you will make the company a lot of fun for people, and people will enjoy being there and doing the right thing. Please don't translate any of this into my believing that wrong things are acceptable as a part of decency. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just saying, bring your decency to work every day. Bring your heart and mind to work every day, and life will be just fine.
And I think it might have been the last lecture series that one of the ways I described it was I have just a personal policy that I won't work with jerks. I just don't. Now, HR department hates to hear that, and whenever they see that in writing or me in a town hall, but it is just keeping it incredibly simple because you don't want to work with jerks. And everybody knows that talent leaves leaders. They don't leave institutions. Talent leaves because of the leaders around them, not because of their pay. And to me, how we create leaders of consequence and leaders who know how to create followership is immensely important.
I once gave a commencement speech at a business school, and my whole focus was around what it takes to be a leader. And we talked about a sense of urgency and a sense of passion and a sense of thoughtful risk-taking and competitive paranoia, and how all of these are enabled by diversity. Because if you surround yourself with people who grew up like you, from the same school you went to, with the same background you went to, in the same middle-class suburb you grew up in, you will fail because you will have blind spots. And in this current day and age, Technology and the drive of technology in our industries is changing things so fast that blind spots are what will bring you down. Whereas if you surround yourself with people who are different from you, actually you profit and gain and you prosper. And so how you do that in a good way, in a sensible way, in a fair way, not just a nice way, that's the magic of leadership.
Okay, terrific. So, questions from the audience?
Love what you said at the end. It leads perfectly into the question I want to ask, which is, we each come with backgrounds that inform our values and our skills. I'm curious, when you look to your own leadership teams, what are the values and skills that you don't have that you're looking to populate on those teams?
So, I don't know how many of you could hear the question, but he's asking about values and skills in our leadership teams that we don't have, that we may need to populate. The skills is much easier. It tends to be very objective. You can lay out what the environment for your competitive circumstances are, for how you think your company will need certain skills for the next few years and so on. And we've done all that. And you, for example, our company, I joined 8 years ago, and we had 8% of our population as millennials. Today it's 44%, because it needed to change so we get new thinking and new blood into the system. We had a lot of our people coming in who came from banking and consulting. 82% of our company came from there. Today it's 40%. And 60% comes from everything from technology to consumer product industries to having worked at an NGO to having worked in a government organization, Transport for London, that kind of stuff. That's skills. Values are very different, because values are the principles on which a company is based. And to me, that's the core of the culture of the company. And it's what brings the passion and the purpose of the company out. And thereby, that's why I was talking about decency quotient. You can have a statement of values that's beautifully written by a company public relations consultant. It's nonsense. Because if you can't translate that into simple English for the person who joined yesterday, it's worth nothing. And so our values are very simple. Bring your heart and mind to work. I care about what you do and how you do. I don't care about what you look like and where you came from. And so my view is, if you lead with your decency, and if you lead with this feeling of what you do and how you do it, as compared to where you came from and what you look like, that's core to who you are. It's core to your values. That's the company we want to be. Anything else is unwelcome. You should go and work at a competitor of mine.
To Ajay's point, the technical competencies are constantly changing, and they're pretty easy to assess. To me, the principles around that leadership team, I gave you one to begin with. Ajay says it more eloquently than "don't work with jerks," but that is the second.
Actually, I love that. I'm going to use that.
The second is, do not attribute it to me. The second is intellectual curiosity, because as Ajay described, if you don't have intellectual curiosity, particularly represented with different styles of thinking, different life experiences, man, when you get that cranking, it is just a potpourri of fun and challenge. If you think about intellectual curiosity, no jerks, the other is grit. And I'm a firm believer that I want people around me who demonstrate grit, that have been through challenging times and that they have overcome. That in interviews, I can tell you that's kind of one of my go-to places that I want to hear about challenges that people have and how they've overcome it. Because there are people that operate with grit, and you want them with you when things get tough. Thanks.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
At one point, you mentioned that there are 2 billion people in the world who doesn't have access to bank nowadays, and that will be an even bigger problem in the future. It would be great as a business opportunity, I think, and also as a leader, if you could help solve this problem, that would be a great achievement. What do you guys believe that you can do to help solve this problem?
So we're actually doing a great deal. If you Google us, you will find out, or if you Encyclopedia Britannica us, which you will not be able to do, you will find out that we're doing a bunch of things in that space. Let me just tell you 2 aspects to it for a second. One is 2 billion people don't have accounts. It so happens 2 billion people also don't have an identity that allows them to prove who they are. If you don't have an identity, a lot of things that we take for granted, paying a bill, hiring a car, living in a hotel, getting on a plane, you can't do. And so even your voice is not counted when the government does research because you don't exist. You can't vote. You can't do anything. So getting identities and accounts are kind of interrelated. And the reason for that is bankers cannot open an account for you because otherwise they'll end up wearing an orange jumpsuit. And my friend Jud doesn't like orange jumpsuits. And that's a good reason because I like him to be with me. And the point here is, all the jokes aside, is that you've got to get to getting an identity issued and then getting to a way to give them an account. So what we've done in a number of countries, South Africa, Egypt, in Mexico we're doing it, is to work with governments to issue identities and then use that to open an account for them, either on a phone, like in Egypt, or on a card, like in South Africa, or in Nigeria, and so on, and get people into the mainstream so their social benefits, their government payments can be deposited onto that card. 40% of what governments give their citizens never reach the citizen on the average. In the NGO world, that's called leakage. I call it theft, right? And that's because the system takes the money out. If you can put that electronically onto one of his cards, you remove the ability for someone to come in between a government paying its citizenry. We have worked with partners like him. Banamex, a bank that Citi has bought 15 years ago in Mexico, is one of our biggest partners in Mexico. As of now, we're distributing aid in Mexico because of the earthquake on cards. The idea is that if you add all that up over the last few years, we've reached 360 million people with such things, with an account, just us and our partners. And I made a commitment to reach 500 million by 2020, and we will. And so it is possible to get to that 2 billion, but you need a public-private partnership in a way where the government plays its role, issuing the identity, we play our role together as institutions, and at the same time, you have our capital and our ingenuity and our innovation applied to what the government cannot do by itself. There isn't enough philanthropic money and government money in the world to solve the kinds of issues that society needs to deal with. You need to have private capital and ingenuity applied to it.
What he said.
So Chris is going to close down the session, but I just want to thank you both for showing the audience what it means to be a true leader of consequence. Thank you so much.
Thank you.